dealing with death and grief in the 80s was not good, and to be honest with you, I don't think it's that brilliant now. That's why I'm on a mission to help people with death and grief and dealing with those issues around loss.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome Janice Thompson from the United Kingdom. And how are you, Janice?
I'm very well, thank you, very well.
And it's a sunny old English day over there right at the moment, or?
It is, yeah, it's real bright and crisp and very autumnal, very nice.
Let's get straight into this, because I want to just welcome Janice, because we're going to be talking about something really fantastic, death. And reason why this all happened, so let me just give you a little bit of a story. I was delivering a training in my hometown in Bristol, and I come over with my wife and my son, and we took over this whole training room in this large hall, and I was describing how you could trigger off specific disease processes, and Janice was the demonstration subject. And while I was doing that, she really didn't react at all, which was very unusual. Anyway, a couple of minutes later, I don't know, it was about 5 minutes, she turned around and she said, "Richard," and I said, "Yeah." "I can't move my legs." I said, "Wow, that's amazing. Look at the body do that." And then she turned around and she used, I think the English use expletives in specific ways, don't they?
I do.
Well, she just basically turned around and she said, "Well, yeah." Fill in the
rude
blank.
word.
Very, very rude word, wasn't it, Janice?
It was indeed.
And with that, everybody in the room just piled around Janice to heal what was the underlying problem. And it later transpired that Janice, you'd been through quite a traumatic time, and the reaction of your body of unable to move your legs was as a direct result of that. And then also this led on to a massive understanding of death, and that's really what I'd like to explore with you today.
Absolutely. As you was working with me and my legs went totally dead, but lots of other stuff physically was going on with me as well. My heart rate was going completely, what felt really irregular. I was getting really hot and bothered, and my mind, funnily enough, was really, really calm, which, I've had some panics in the past, and it wasn't like that at all, considering I couldn't literally move my legs. I wasn't panicking in my head at all, but my physical reaction to my body was really going crazy. And yeah, everyone come around and started doing sort of different techniques to start helping.
Let's just start off with this question, because we're looking at death. And the reason why this is very poignant is because of your story. So I guess it might be really worthwhile to share a little bit of that story. And by the way, when we're talking about death, we're not just talking about, obviously, people passing away, but we're also talking about death of relationships, death of maybe an animal, or death of a job, or just something like that, or even death of somewhere where that you lived and you're no longer living there. So it isn't just a physical death, which can be horrific, obviously, but it can also be the completion of one of those things.
A little while before I come on your course, I was at home with my family, my daughters, my two daughters, one was age 7, one was age 14 at the time. And I used to be a personal trainer, and I'd just come back from running a class and come back, and I've got the spaghetti bolognese on the cooker, all going away nicely. My teenage daughter was in her room doing teenage things, and my little girl who was 7 was outside in the garden with her dad. And she come running in and said, "Oh, Mummy, Daddy's on the floor." And I thought, oh, he's having a laugh again with her, playing around, messing about. So I went out, and I could see really instantly that he wasn't messing around. There's something really major going on. So I come in and rung 999. And from there on in, it was just chaos. Our dogs were running around. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't comprehend what's even happening, so much as the fact that the lady on the other end of the phone was saying to me, "Is your husband conscious?" And I couldn't tell at the time whether he was conscious or not, because I was so in shock. I just didn't know what was happening. Suffice to say, the paramedics came, an emergency doctor came, who I know was a great guy. And about 4 hours later, they declared him dead, massive heart attack, no signs whatsoever. And from then on, I just literally fell apart. And really, my doctor was great, really great. And I'm a very holistic person, and I really didn't want to take antidepressants, and he kept sort of saying to me, we'll just have some antidepressants just to get through this little bit. And I'd say no, and he'd say all right, we'd have a little chat, and that'd be enough to help me a little bit. Then I'd go away and come back a few weeks later, and the same thing would happen again. He'd say, well, do you want some antidepressants just to get over this bit? And I'd say no thank you, and we'd have a chat, and I'd go away and feel a bit better. But he was a really respectful guy to what was going on with me. I had some form of help with counselling. And then, after a long time of really in the, the dark night of the soul, as they say, I started looking at energy techniques and different things. And that's when I ended up at Richard's course, which was sometime later. It must have been 2 or 3, something like that, years later. In the interim time, I'd got myself into a relationship that really wasn't very healthy at all. And I just couldn't understand it, because that wasn't a pattern of mine, to be in relationships where it was, what was going on was really not pleasant. So I just couldn't understand it, but I couldn't get out of it either. So I went along on this course, 10-day course with Richard. So thought, if nothing else, I'm going to be away from this person for 10 days. That must give me some sort of ability to try and shift that. It's just remarkable what really happened, because really what happened there was I realised that what I brought into my conscious mind from my subconscious was that I was with this person to remain unhappy. And he was great at helping me to remain unhappy. And I just didn't see it. And I don't think even if somebody had told me that at the time, I would have realised. I think it had to come up from my subconscious into my conscious for me the penny to drop. And boy, oh boy, did it drop, because that's exactly when I really had all those symptoms of my legs swelling and everything started to happen, because I was really aware something major had shifted there.
Why did you start looking at death? I mean, it's pretty obvious, you've been through quite a horrendous situation, but not everybody would suddenly go, hey, I think death's quite interesting, I'll go and look at that.
Yeah.
Apart from you, Janice.
Especially with my lively personality and my constant joking and everything. It's like, whoa, I seem to be doing something really on the other end of the spectrum. But really, I think because it's been a really long journey, what I also realised was I probably, although I was never diagnosed, if I needed to be diagnosed, I don't know, but that I probably had complicated grief, or at least prolonged grief, or at least a grief on top of a grief that had never been dealt with. Because when I was 14 years old, my father died of lung cancer. And to me at 14, I didn't even, I knew he was ill, but I didn't think he was going to die. So it was another shock. And I'd never dealt with that. And dealing with death and grief in the 80s was not good. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's that brilliant now. That's why I'm on a mission to help people with death and grief and dealing with those issues around loss.
I know you've been on this mission for quite a while. You've written a book, and you've been doing courses on this. It's so important we get this message out there, because I've lost some important people in my life, and we recently lost my mother-in-law, and I didn't think I was in shock. Honestly, I didn't think I was in shock. No. But a week later, one of my students turned around, who I know very well, Glenda Johnson, and hopefully she'll come in on the mini-series in the future. And she turned around and she said, "You're in shock, Richard." And I said, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not." She said, "Yes, you are." I went, No, I'm completely and utterly okay."
Yeah.
So let's get on to the next question. The next question is really, what do you do then when you're working with a client who has had severe loss? Or what do you do?
Well, the first thing I do is assess where they're at in their loss, because that's a really important aspect. If somebody's been recently bereaved, I'm going to do slightly different things, well, very different things I would suggest than I would do if they're further down the line in their grief and or it's turned into a complicated grief. The other part of that, I'll actually just say briefly here, is that some people come to me with an issue that they don't realize is related to a loss. Right. So I will work with clients that will come to me with certain physical things, certain emotional or mental issues that are going on. And when we actually find out underneath what's happening there, that actually it comes from a loss that wasn't resolved. And
right.
and I think the main thing here that I'll always reiterate is when you have a loss that is, and you're having a shock, you have a shock to your system with any grief, depending on when that happens. For me, my husband, it is immediately, because it was a sudden death. For some people, if they lose their partners to such things as cancer, it might be the shock when they have heard the news that they've got their partner's been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Those shocks in the body cause such an enormous amount of energy. There's such an enormous amount of energy around when somebody has realized that they've had a loss. And really my work now is working towards really help into shift that energy into transforming their lives, basically.
Next question is, how do you heal differently then? How do you heal this loss? How do you go about doing that? You talked about energy techniques, so you're using what, EFT, matrix, you use some ACE stuff, I know you do, but there's other things as well that you actually do. And I think other people need to understand that Janice is, she does a lot of research.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, I do use EFT. EFT is a good tool for initial grief. Somebody come in very recently, been bereaved. EFT is good because it's just like it's like a real nice stroke on the body to just say, calm down, let's everything just slow down a little bit, because we're basically in a major stress response. So by actually using EFT in a really basic way, by tapping on their feelings, I always try and help promote them understand their feelings. I use something called Hearts of Grief, which I can put up and show you if you want. It's in my book and certain other places on the courses, where we really try and help people to understand what emotions they're feeling, and label them, or things like I feel an aching in my chest or whatever it is, because that helps people focus on something, and it instead of it all just being so overwhelming for people. So and another reason I do that is because later down the line we seriously use that within working with ACE as well. So if you can get people to have an understanding that if they do some tapping, they can actually help to bring those emotions down a little. And I'll move on to using some matrix imprinting. So I'll use that when people start to keep repeating that they've got certain memories that come up or certain things that bother them, you know. I'll give an example. I had a lady who was with her husband. He'd got cancer, a young couple. He was in the hospital bed. She come to visit him, and when she come to visit him, she took off her boots and sat down, had a chat with him, and he got out of bed to go to the toilet. He tripped over her boots and fell and banged his head. He was absolutely fine in relationship to his head, but she had so much guilt and eventually passed away. But that memory was just haunting her. She felt so guilty about what happened. She just kept rolling it over. And we know that if we keep focusing on something, it just keeps promoting it. It's getting those neuro pathways more promoting that thought, and we keep thinking more, and the more we think about it, the more we feel guilty. So we need to look at those aspects within grief, definitely, and any loss come to that, any of those particular memories. So we did some matrix imprinting on that and change that picture and change that energy and clear it. So that can be a really good tool within helping people with specific memories of things that are going on. Looking at people where the problem goes on longer is perhaps, as I said, where I work the most, and that's to do with patterns as well. And I'd like to just speak a little bit about generational stuff, generational grief here, Richard, if that's okay, because that's really important. So there's something called generational grief, where grief and the trauma of grief and the shock of grief can come down through generations. It can come down through generations. It can come down through ancestral patterns. It can come down through past lives. So, and it's often associated with big group traumas like genocides or Holocaust. And there's lots of research being done about this at the moment. And I'm just gonna, and I just get, is it okay if I just quote one of these, because it's absolutely fascinating. There's one study done, it's called, and this is about the senses, so this is interesting. One study done called Parental olfactory experience influences behavior and neural structures in subsequent generations. And it was in Nature and Neuroscience, and a lot of these studies now are in a lot of the top journals. And what they did was they took some mice they did a typical Pavlovian conditioning, and what that is they will kept exposing the mice to the smell of cherry blossom, rather mean really, and then giving them a shock. I don't agree with this, by the way, but this is just what's happened. And they'll give them a shock. So these mice got really used to the shock being associated with the cherry blossom, and then they stopped giving the shock, and every time they smelt the cherry blossom, they would react in a fearful manner. Yeah. And that's a typical Pavlovian conditioning. But what also happened was 5 generations down, the mice were still reacting to the smell of cherry blossom. That's their great-great-great-grandchildren of those mice that were originally stopped, was still responding to that cherry blossom. There's loads of studies with Holocaust survivors whose children suffer anxiety and depression, have these vivid memories of things that happened that they've never actually experienced, but are really physically having trouble with that. So that's where I'm doing a lot of work now with those patterns, and that's where ACE is brilliant, because it's those patterns that come down. It can be a pattern of emotional things or issues of anxiety and depression. It can be physical things with all numerous issues around things that not only are we helping to clear the grief, but we're actually going beyond that. And that's what I say when I say I'm helping people to really use that massive amount of energy in grief to really push through other aspects of their lives that they've been struggling with anyway.
Is there anything else that you want to just add to conclude this?
I would really, and I think it's really involving ACE work really, because it really seems to get to all those aspects of those patterns that come down for people. And another one that I will just conclude with, which I think often shows up working with the clients I work with ACE, which is brilliant, is some spiritual aspect, which, it may be religious, it may not, but it is some sort of connection and understanding.
And I think on that note, let's conclude with the opening story, because I know with your husband, after his death for quite a few years, and with the other guy, you were never able to talk about him.
No.
And you felt very guilty about that.
Yeah.
But then after the course with me and working on that particular stuff, a couple of funny things happened, didn't they? I'll quickly explain. But basically, the guy that you were with,
oh yeah,
you basically you came back from the course, and he had a suitcase. He said, "I don't want to be with you any longer."
I didn't have enough to do anything.
Fantastic. Yeah,
totally. So those clear and those energetic lines of whatever's going on is so important, Richard. And I think that's why I really think the work you are doing with ACE is so important. And as you said at the beginning, to finish, as you said at the beginning, I've talked a lot about bereavement here, but as you said in the beginning, there's lots of losses of empty nest syndrome when kids go to university, relationships, jobs, loss of weight it can be an issue, which it can be remarkable. People actually get into all sorts of psychological issues with that. Any sort of loss at all, the work you're doing really seriously helps with. So
okay.
Because I'm a totally different person now, and there's a lot of thanks to you for that, Richard. If I hadn't dealt with the loss that I'd got, I would not be able to sit here, and I would not be able to help all the people I help, because I'd still be in it myself.
And this was something that we really started to understand, Janice and myself, and I've got to give most of the credit to Janice for this. That the amazing thing that you really discovered is, as you clear all that stuff out, the whole point behind the grief and the guilt and all the other stuff is to bring that person that you've lost closer. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Yeah. And that really was the case. You really become closer if you want to have that connection. It's there, but you need to clear stuff and let go. As soon as I did that work with you and I'd let go of that guy, and I got home and he had packed his bags and was going himself. I mean, that's just brilliant in itself. You don't that's not my job. My job is to clear my stuff, as it is with everybody. You all clear your own stuff, and then the universe will sort the rest out, and it certainly did in that case. And then when he went, I truly felt, oh, I can let go and I'm okay on my own. And in that moment, about a month later, I met my partner now. And we're still together 7 years, and it's brilliant. And my daughters love him. And truly,
well, you also become closer to the person that you actually lost.
Yeah, totally.
That's the oxymoron. That's the dichotomy, isn't it? That's the flip side of the coin. Very, very strange.
Totally, really close. Definitely felt much closer, and I still do. You can't break a love connection. You cannot break a love connection. You can make yourself fit. You can make yourself feel very disconnected from that love connection by not clearing trauma. But if you clear trauma, you can renegotiate that connection. It'll be different, obviously, but you can renegotiate it and it will be there. That happens with so many of my clients as well. That is a absolutely wonderful outcome of people putting in the energy, effort, work to clear traumas within their body related to any type of loss.
I do know that the work you're doing and how you go about healing differently is just on a different scale. I don't know anybody else who's doing this works. So if you want to find out more about or work with Janice, then go to richardflook.com and hit the button Heal You, fill in the information, and we'll put you in touch with Janice. If you want to find out more about her courses and things like that, hit Heal Others, and you'll be put in touch with me, and then we'll discuss some of the things that she's doing, and then we'll go from there. All right, thank you very, very much, Janice. As always, just an absolute pleasure and a lot of laughs, especially with such a challenging subject as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Richard. Thank you.